U.S. airstrikes kill 4 al-Shabaab militants in Somalia. Growing antibiotic resistance prompts new World Health Organization sexually transmitted infections guidelines. And grasshoppers, anyone? A look at the exotic health food offerings at a London food fair. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Tonight we begin our broadcast in East Africa, where the U.S. military says it conducted 2 airstrikes in southern Somalia this week, killing 4 al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab militants involved in attacks on Somali government troops. A U.S. military spokeswoman says the latest strikes took place on Monday in Lower Shabelle region. Now, the U.S. military has in the past used drones to target al-Shabaab senior leaders. The Pentagon says it carried out a strike in late May against Abdullahi Haji Daoud, one of al-Shabaab's senior military planners, who also served as a principal coordinator of attacks in Somalia, Kenya and Uganda. Now, for more details on this week's airstrikes in Somalia, VOA's Kala Bab joins me live via Skype from the Pentagon. Kala, first, we know that this airstrike took place on Monday. Do you have any idea why we're just learning about it?
Well, the Pentagon is very slow, especially when it comes to strikes in Somalia, to get the information out because of 2 major reasons. First, they're only there in support of the Amazon troops and the Somali troops, so they like to have them to take the lead on this. And then secondly, they like to verify and make sure that they are announcing the right target strikes and confirming who was killed and who wasn't, if possible.
Now, we've mentioned briefly, but what more can you tell us about past similar strikes?
Well, the United States they have a clause now with the military where they have a self-defense clause. This means not only when U.S. forces come under attack in Somalia, but also when their allies, their Amazon allies, their Somali allies come under attack, they have the ability to strike at al-Shabaab. This has come in very handy. Oftentimes, I was talking to a spokesperson from AFRICOM just today, and he said to stress that this does not necessarily mean that the U.S. forces were under attack in this particular instance, but the United States did have some intelligence sharing that they had pushed along. Something didn't seem quite right. They noticed some fighters were on their way to attack some Somali fighters, and they decided to conduct the strike.
And we know that it's a policy currently not to have U.S. forces on the ground. But now many people may question, is there any evidence whatsoever that these strikes have been effective?
Well, I think that if you look at the strike that you had mentioned, targeting that particular leader and then also targeting other leaders going back several years, that has made a difference with reducing the al-Shabaab organization. And these recent strikes, there was one earlier this year that killed about 150 al-Shabaab fighters when they attacked a camp. They saw the opportunity, they saw these al-Shabaab members gathering, and they decided to take the strike. That doesn't always happen because of these strikes. The people in al-Shabaab don't meet and don't congregate the way that they used to. So they've had to spread their numbers out to try to prevent these strikes. So I think that in itself is a good reason and a good source of how these strikes are being effective and how they can be used in the future.
And I know we don't have a lot of information about this, but the lack of information that we always wish we had, is it to do with the fact that the U.S. doesn't want to make this look like it is their war? This is like the war of those countries. They're just helping, right?
Absolutely. The United States has a very small footprint in Africa. They just recently got the authorization to help out with airstrikes in Libya. They have 1 base in Djibouti, and then there are some small forces, some places, there are some in Cameroon, there are some in Somalia, but the United States wants to make it clear that when it comes to Africa, they're always in support. They're not trying to come in and try to take over or do anything that couldn't help the governments involved. But on the same vein, counterterrorism is very important to the United States. So anything that the United States can do to stop any terrorists from attacking inside of Africa or outside of Africa, especially the United States, they want to be there to help.
Carla, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Carla Bab reporting live from the Pentagon via Skype. Now, Gabon's opposition leadership faces a Thursday legal deadline to seek a vote recount in an election they say was stolen by President Ali Bongo, whose family has ruled the oil-rich country for nearly 50 years. Results of last week's election showed Bongo 57 defeated his main rival Jean Ping, a veteran diplomat, by fewer than 6,000 votes in the August poll, prompting days of violent riots during which at least 6 people died. Bongo has rejected accusations that results were altered to ensure his victory, but has come under increasing pressure, international pressure to back a recount of votes. Ping, 73, has repeatedly questioned the neutrality of the court, but his campaign manager says Ping is weighing the option of officially challenging the results. Now, President Barack Obama says comments by Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte will not impact U.S. relations with the people of the Philippines. Now, following an Association of Southeast Asian Nations meeting in Laos Wednesday, Mr. Obama says he and Duterte shook hands during a brief interaction at a dinner. The White House canceled a meeting between the two Tuesday after Duterte called President Obama a derogatory name while warning him not to lecture him about his government's crackdown on drug traffickers. Duterte later expressed regrets.
I don't take these comments personally because it seems as if this is a phrase he's used repeatedly, including directed at the Pope and others, and so I think it seems to be just a habit, a way of speaking for him. What I indicated to him is that my team should be meeting with his and determine how we can move forward on a whole range of issues.
Well, Duterte campaigned on promises to end illegal drug activity and has alarmed human rights organizations with his deadly crackdown. He has defended the killing of more than 2,000 people, saying he is following the will of those who elected him. Obama said the United States wants to partner with the Philippines on the issue of drug traffickers, but in a way that is consistent with international norms and the rule of law. While the rhetoric remains hot on the U.S. campaign trail, where Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump says Russian President Vladimir Putin has been more of a leader than U.S. President Barack Obama. During an NBC News forum in which he was interviewed separately from Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton, Trump said he thinks as president he would have a very good relationship with Putin. He also said Russia and the United States have a joint interest in defeating Islamic State. He further criticized U.S. military action in Iraq and Obama.
Generals under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have not been successful. I think under the leadership of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the generals have been reduced to rubble. They have been reduced to a point where it's embarrassing for our country.
Speaking from Laos, where he was wrapping up a Southeast Asian summit, Obama dismissed Trump's comments, saying once again the candidate is unfit to be president.
I don't think the guy's qualified to be president of the United States. And every time he speaks, that opinion is confirmed. And I think the most important thing for the public and the press is to just listen to what he says and follow up and ask questions about what appear to be either contradictory or uninformed or outright wacky ideas.
Well, Trump and Clinton will directly face off in their first presidential debate on September 26th. There will be 2 other debates in October ahead of the November 8th election. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, the World Health Organization issues new guidelines for treating antibiotic-resistant sexually transmitted infections. Stay with us.
From Science and Technology, here's what's new.
It's called a pod ride. Swedish inventor Michael Kellman says his 4-wheeled, covered, electric-assisted bicycle that looks like a tiny tent with tires is weather-protected and much more comfortable than a regular bike. And he says just as practical.
It is small and have a short turning radius to work well on bikeways and in other city environments. It has also proven to be real fun to drive.
The pod ride has a range of about 60 kilometers and a top speed of 25 kilometers an hour. You steer with 2 stick handles with handbrakes attached on either side of the seat. It has a windshield and turn signals and a bit of storage in the back. The driver sits at a level equal to normal cars, and Kelman says the vehicle should be street legal in most countries. When the pod ride finally hits the streets, the estimated price tag is between $2,000 and $4,000. For VOA's What's New, I'm Todd Grossans.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They tell you what people are talking about. So for an in-depth look at the stories trending high on social media, turn to #VOA. It's not your typical talk show. From politics to pop culture, #VOA brings in the people leading the conversation, engages the audience, and gets answers to your questions. #VOA. Smart talk for smart people.
Well, joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu. What do you have for us today, Lino?
Scientists say they have found a new compound that stops malaria in animal studies with a single low dose. The chemical compound fought early infection in the liver as well as malaria parasites that were circulating in the blood. The researchers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard University say the compound appears to wipe out parasites before they can multiply in the liver and be released in bigger numbers into the bloodstream. Tests in mice showed the one-off treatment prevented infection for the full 30 days of the study. Malaria is spread to humans by the bites of infected female mosquitoes. The researchers hope their early work could lead to new drugs for people. The study was published in the journal Nature. New guidelines for the treatment of 3 common sexually transmitted infections have been issued by the World Health Organization in response to the growing threat of antibiotic resistance.
Chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis are all caused by bacteria. These sexually transmitted diseases are generally curable with antibiotics. The World Health Organization estimates that each year 131 million people are infected with chlamydia, 78 million with gonorrhea, and 5.6 million with syphilis. Dr. Nathalie Broutet is medical officer with the Department of Reproductive Health and Research at the World Health Organization.
Every day worldwide, there are more than 1 million new cases of sexually transmitted infections. These infections affect women, children, adolescents, men, and everyone everywhere in the world.
The WHO says these STIs have become increasingly resistant to antibiotics in recent years, reducing treatment options. Gonorrhea has developed the strongest resistance. Antibiotic resistance in chlamydia and syphilis, though less common, also exist, making prevention and prompt treatment critical.
WHO has just released new guidelines for gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis to prevent antimicrobial resistance and to encourage countries to make treatment available, especially treatment like benzathine penicillin.
Benzathine penicillin was recognized by the 69th World Health Assembly in May 2016 as an essential medicine, but it has been in short supply for several years. The WHO is working with partners to identify countries with shortages and help monitor global availability of benzathine penicillin to close the gap between national needs and supply of the antibiotic. The new recommendations are based on the latest available evidence on the most effective treatments for these 3 sexually transmitted infections.
The correct treatment of these sexually transmitted infections is essential to control and reduce resistance to antibiotics. WHO has developed guidelines for the correct treatment and encourages countries to adapt these new treatments.
When left undiagnosed and untreated, these STIs can result in serious complications and long-term health problems for women, such as pelvic inflammatory diseases, ectopic pregnancy, and miscarriage. Untreated gonorrhea and chlamydia can cause infertility in both men and women. Infection with chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis can also increase a person's risk of being infected with HIV 2 to 3-fold. An untreated STI in a pregnant woman increases the chances of stillbirth and newborn death.
Get this, a group of scientists in Great Britain is trying to create a chemical library of peptides contained in the venom of some deadly insects, hoping to find a powerful drug against drug-resistant superbugs. VOA's George Putich reports.
Many of the plastic living quarters of the 400 or so insects in this laboratory bear the ominous skull and crossbones, meaning that their bite can be anything from painful to downright deadly. Their venom contains hundreds of chemical components, each with a different target and effect, and that makes them interesting to medical researchers.
Some of them we've found actually can kill bacteria, and bacteria like E. coli and Staphylococcus that are very relevant at the moment where modern medicines is failing. And we're also finding venoms that are modifying and killing cancer cells.
Finding new ways to kill bacteria is vital, since the excessive use of antibiotics has created some superbugs, like tuberculosis, that have grown resistant to the medicines we have historically used against them. Animal venom has already been used in medicines, but with about 100,000 different venomous animals in the world, there is much more to discover. Trim says venom tech researchers are trying to isolate and catalog those components, looking for the ones that could be turned into new drugs.
The principle of venom tech is separating venoms out into their component parts and targeting them to the right disease area. So this is the experience of the team in drug discovery of putting the right venom for the right drug target. So we maximize the hits, and a hit is an interesting peptide that might make it to a drug.
The insects are well fed in order to produce as much venom as possible, which is extracted in a way that doesn't harm the animal.
We anesthetize the invertebrates, just put them asleep, makes it safer for us because they're immobile, they can't bite us, but also it's better for the animals as well. And using a very tiny electrical stimulation just to contract the muscle and squeeze the gland, so we get a small amount of venom produced.
Components are separated through a two-phase process called high-pressure liquid chromatography that yields about 100 proteins per venom. Each protein contains between 1 and 5 different molecules that may someday be turned into powerful new drugs. George Putich, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch with me, find me on Twitter @Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. And I'll be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health report every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, Anthony Oshinuga, the son of Nigerian immigrants, runs an air tour company in California and has realized his childhood dream of becoming an aerobatic pilot. VOA's Michael Sullivan spoke with him about his love of flying.
Anthony Oshinuga can often be found in his Pitts special aircraft flying loops and rolls. He set his sights on flying at the age of 5 when visiting an airport.
So I was taken by what was going on. I told my father, that's exactly what I want to do.
His parents came from Lagos, Nigeria.
I was born in Austin, Texas, so I'm the first generation to be out here in the United States. All my family, all my immediate family is back home in Nigeria.
With his small tour company called Air Oshinuga, he flies over the wine country of Temecula, California, north of San Diego.
We're a wine aerial scenic company, so basically we partner with 2 big wineries in the area. We provide clients with 30-minute scenic aerial flights over Temecula, and then we land, and then they go down there and do wine tasting.
He first entered national flying competition in 2014.
That's when I went to the U.S. National Aerobatic Championships, and I placed 4th out of 25 competitors. So since then, things have been really blossoming in the arena of aerobatics and air shows and air racings.
He loves the sense of freedom.
It's the fact of you're free in 3 dimensions, in the 3 dimensions. So, you know, up, down, left, right, you know, yawing left and right. So you're pretty much free. You can do anything you want to do. And you can't get that freedom walking on the planet.
Oshinuga studied engineering, but his first love is flying, and he plans to stay aloft as long as he can. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Temecula, California.
Well, that's fascinating. And it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, embracing the superfood trend at an upscale London food fair. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. Britain's Defense Minister Michael Fallon says his country will deploy 400 peacekeeping troops to South Sudan. In Gabon, the opposition says that the Gabonese government is stoking tension after disputed presidential vote. In Ivory Coast, a century-old metal bridge on the Abidjan-Ouagadougou railway line collapses. With a freight train on it, no casualties were reported. Finally, in Kenya, young men from the Luhya community undergo traditional ritual of circumcision to mark their transition from boyhood to manhood, cut HIV rates. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Think downtown Beirut in the center of the British capital. The theme of this year's London Design Biennale is Utopia by Design. Now, 37 nations from 6 continents are presenting their installations. This is London's first Design Biennale. The architect of the recreation said she wanted to demonstrate how even the ordinary can be utopian. Meanwhile, an Albanian artist has created an arrangement of stainless steel columns and benches designed to encourage both self-reflection and solidarity. An Austria-based design studio has interpreted the utopian theme by creating a bright kinetic light installation. It's all intended to show the fragility of the utopian ideal and how it can be easily disturbed. Well, staying in London, if you like your food organic, are these garden bugs or the food of the future? Insects and probiotic ice cream are all part of a growing health food trend in the UK. Grasshoppers are being advertised as an alternative source of protein. Then there's this, insects ground into special powders and flour. Meanwhile, a traditional sweet treat could be the healthiest ice cream around. It's sweetened with plants and it contains live probiotic cultures, which are often associated with yogurt. Even people who work at the cutting edge of the food industry are quite surprised by how quickly the edible insects trend has taken off. And we're all surprised and slightly disturbed. And finally, she's the newly crowned Miss World Japan. Priyanka Yoshikawa has credited her Indian heritage for her pageant success. Now, there has been ongoing debate in Japan about the ethnicity of beauty queens. You may remember the first biracial Miss Universe Japan, Ariana Miyamoto, whose father is African American and mother is Japanese, and she was criticized for not looking Japanese enough. The new Miss World Japan is focused on the future, though. She wants to open a children's home in Kolkata. She's also considering a foray into Bollywood. If that doesn't pan out, she also holds an elephant training license. So, of course, the sky's the limit. The Miss World pageant will be held in Washington, D.C. in November. Be sure to pencil that in. So that's what's trending today. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Haiti. And now let's go to Hollywood. It's Nollywood, actually, learning from Hollywood. If after a competitive selection process, creative professionals from Africa will get to spend 3 weeks in Los Angeles. Visiting movie studios and taking intensive classes, not only will they have the opportunity to sharpen their skills, they'll also receive training to become entrepreneurs. Elizabeth Lee tells us all about it.
Scene 2, extreme, take 2, marker.
Action. Shooting a film in the heart of Hollywood was a dream that is now very real for some African entertainers.
I could scream.
It's surreal, it's amazing, it's exciting for me because I never thought I would be here.
You have missed the deadline.
These students, all working industry professionals from different African countries, are part of a program called Hollywood in Focus. They participate in workshops and get hands-on experience to expand their knowledge base in film production. For Jim Fortune-Kazi, learning about filmmaking here is much more visual and hands-on than back home.
It's been very practical. You can see these things. You don't just hear about them. You see them, you know how they work and all that.
The workshops also train these students to think of themselves as entrepreneurs.
You know, it's not a model anymore where you're waiting for the phone to ring to get hired into a gig. I mean, we're shifting, that this space is shifting from a gig economy to an entrepreneurial space, and a space where companies can be born, innovations can happen, and content can be distributed from independent voices.
This shift is happening because of the internet and changing technology.
So what you're finding is there are a lot of self-driven content creators. It's a lot of user-generated content. And on the consumption side, with the advent or with the growth of mobile technologies across Africa, a lot of this content can now be consumed for much less than it ever was. So that the democratization of the process through digital media has empowered a whole new generation of content creators.
Who are also entrepreneurs. And these students are learning to think of themselves not only as actors or directors, but as a brand.
I see myself as an entrepreneur. The only glitch to that was I had no idea exactly how to, sell my brand, because along the way you kind of you kind of sell yourself short sometimes, because of the opportunities or because of the lack of the jobs.
These students say what they've learned here will not only enrich their careers, but also elevate the African film industry on the global stage.
To kind of get that experience here and, put that in my own country and in my own, scope, basically, just so we can be up to speed with what's happening around the world and, give ourselves opportunities to be able to tell our own stories the way we want to.
After they graduate from the program, organizers say these creative professionals have the ability to positively impact their country's economy and culture through all the different forms of media. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Los Angeles.
And that's it. Have a good night. Thank you.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here's a word you might have heard in medical stories.
Chemotherapy.
Until recently, the treatment all patients received was the same chemotherapy. Sometimes it helped, but sometimes it didn't. Researchers have been trying to come up with better treatments to shrink the tumors without affecting normal tissue or subjecting patients to the negative side effects of chemotherapy.
Chemotherapy is medicine used by doctors to fight cancer and some mental disorders.
Chemotherapy uses chemicals to kill cancer cells in a person's body. The chemicals sometimes are mixed in a liquid and injected into a person's blood.
Now, when you hear the word chemotherapy, you will know what this newsword means.